Oh, that's why. There you go.
Let me know if you can hear now, please, brothers and sisters. Apologize for those technical difficulties. You all let me know if you can hear something now, please. But again, it's blackstream.live/TUWG. So it's TUWG for the ultimate world. And you watch tonight, because when I say that you are up for a treat tonight, you all just don't understand, because Sister Vivian got something funny. And a whole lot. She's smiling like the very humble person that she is, but I'm telling you all that every time I hear this sister talk, I believe I know a lot about putting some food in the ground. I know a lot about taking care of some soil. I know a lot about growing food. But every time I listen to her, I learn something new. And so without any further delay, I'm just going to say your site one more time, blackstream.live/TUWG. Check it out. Kind of go tonight while we're doing the show, or you can go tomorrow and check it out. And just understand that next week's show, I'm going to speak specifically about vaccines and all the different information that's going on right now. But I'm going to spend a little time at the beginning of the show helping you all understand how to manage everything that's going on in blackstream.live. Again, supporting black businesses is important, right? You're listening to two black businesses today. But instead of continuing to do my presentations through, I would say, industries that are not for our benefit, I would rather give my energy, my time, and my money to a black streaming organization, a black streaming company. And I pray that you appreciate that, agree with that, and I pray that you come on with me. Because just like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all these companies started, and a lot of them, when they first started, they were garbage. But because we kept going back and kept using them, they kept getting better and better and better as they made more and more money off of our content. And so I pray that the same thing happens with Blackstream. Okay? So let me get a couple of shout outs, and then we're going to get right into our information with our beautiful guests. So Vivian Muhammad, hairstyles by Ona, Brother Demetrius, Joshua Stoney, who got here? Yeah, Joshua Stoney, Hakeem Rashad, Sister Queen, AD Electronics, Loretta Muhammad, Proud Papa. Wa alaikum salam to you all. Thank you all, many of my regular supporters and people that have been supporting me for a long time. I appreciate it. And so let's get into the show. I have a special guest, none of the great fingers that I know of, Sister Vivian Muhammad. Sister Vivian, how are you this evening?
I am well. How are you, sir?
Praise be to Allah. I'm doing wonderful. I am excited about this show. As I said, every time I interact with you, I learn something. And I already think I'm pretty skilled. I think I'm pretty good, you know what I'm saying? But when I learn something from you, and I can take my farming and my gardening to another level, that's what I wanted you all to hear, brothers and sisters. This is a sister that has been doing, I say, growing power for years, right? And in my personal viewpoint, when people ask me what is my assessment of how food and the reality of food is going to evolve, I say that based on the research I've done of indigenous societies and the dynasties in the motherland before we were inundated with the European, never large tracts of land where you made food and you sold it and took it to other parts of the world. Most food was grown locally and done in very short places. And I know for a fact that Sister Vivian doesn't have like a couple of pots in her house, but she doesn't have thousands of acres either. She's somewhere in between, but she has a wealth of knowledge. So can you go ahead and just introduce yourself, how you love to, and then tell us how, like maybe what you were exposed to as a child, and then how did you grow into the place that you are now with growing food and empowering people to understand what it is to have your hands and your feet in the dirt?
Well, for me, the story started, just to be clear, I was not a farmer. I wasn't thinking about farming. I knew my father always talked about wanting to own a farm.
Mm.
And we lived in Indianapolis my entire life. So outside of going to my great grandmother's home in Terrible, Indiana, where she always had a little small garden, and her neighbor Dale grew grapes and made this wine that everybody in the neighborhood drank.
Wow.
Outside of those exposures, I really didn't have my head on in mind in farming. And it wasn't until honestly that I joined the Nation of Islam that my perspective and understanding of land ownership,
Wow.
and
Yes.
began to turn me towards the land. And specifically, honestly, for me, How to Eat to Live, reading those books, books 1 and 2, are really, they were game changers for me.
Yes.
Joining the nation was a game changer, but the exposure to those books and the knowledge in those books, that really, it changed things for me. It changed my perspective of life, and it then kind of catapulted, like, or grew from there. So you start off and you're like, okay, throw out all the hog, you know, that part.
So if I may just interrupt you just for a second, at what stage in your life was that? Was that like high school, college? Around what age were you when you
No,
that
I
transition?
was actually 28, 27 or 28 years old. So I had unfortunately been raised on all the horrible things that we were raised on.
Right.
And knew really nothing about that. I remember once I had a girl friend in high school that told me that she was a vegetarian, and I distinctly remember feeling sorry for her. Thinking, you don't eat meat, you poor thing. I just couldn't, you know.
Right.
And I say that, and that's a true story, to give you an idea of the type of transformation
Yes.
that I've gone through in my life. And of course, all my children are vegetarians. They're grown now. They have a choice when I first came into the teachings, but praise be to Allah, they stayed with it. But that for me, you know, changed everything. And I didn't intend on vegetarianism, but it just seemed like it was just a natural progression for me personally. It just happened. I just started giving up one meat after another. Next thing you know, it was going to be to give up.
Right.
And so the book changed my life. The teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is taught by and through the Honorable Farrakhan really transformed every aspect of my life. And I would say that the Eat to Live part was the most significant. My weight changed, everything changed. And from that point, it segued into every other aspect of my life. And then in 2006, we decided, you know, to go one step further. I remember hearing, I believe, Dr. Aline talking about the Honorable Farrakhan and then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the book How to Eat to Live, and how really you're not eating to live if you're not growing your own food. How we've got to take control of our food. And then, of course, the thoughts of my grandmother, the thoughts of my father's words about always wanting to farm. And some of his last actions before he passed away was to start a little small garden in the backyard. So I took it one step further, start off in the yard, then I decided to transform the dog run into a greenhouse, and then I decided to buy quarter-acre lots, and all of this kind of was just this progression. And for those that might be asking, or thinking in their own mind, I don't have a green thumb, I kill everything. I hear that all the time. Right. I kill everything. Yes. I didn't either. I didn't either. I learned. I mean,
Right.
and learning from a lot of other people. Um, I was blessed with a neighbor. Shout out to him. His name is Mr. Melvin Hendricks. And one day my sister and I and my mother were on a walk, and we found this jewel that was in our own backyard, not literally, but around the corner from where we lived. And Mr. Hendricks, who had gone to the University of California, had all these beautiful comfrey plants and all this composting and all this other stuff going on in this backyard. And he kind of took us in and kind of broke some things down to us. That's kind of really when my understanding of agriculture was triggered to want to go even deeper, where I wanted to have a better understanding of the soil, a better understanding of the pH and all the inputs and amendments. And so it just kind of progressed from there. But I always give the nation credit, because the truth of the matter is, Dr. Keeley, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for the teachers.
Right. That's right. Okay, a couple shout outs. We're going to get right back to it. I see my friend David Tonsall on here. They're saying it's really hard to hear. Well, that's it, y'all. Go ahead to blackstream.live. Everybody on blackstream.live say that they can hear really good. So everybody that's on YouTube and Facebook, please go to Blackstream. It's in the comments, blackstream.live/TUWG, and let me know what you think once you get there. But I was going to say this. My friend David Tonsall, who is on here, is one of my longtime friends. He and I lived a few blocks away from each other for years. And he and I used to trade secrets. And what you were talking about is about learning from other people, and how once you got it, it's like almost a gift you want to give to everybody else, because you want to help other people. And that speaks to the unity that, of course, we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan, about the unity and how unity is more powerful than atomic bomb. Because when you learn something and you want to go coalesce with other people and coalesce ideas, it makes everybody more powerful. And that's some of the conversation that Sister Vivian and I have had, is that our realities are so intertwined with each other, because how to live being the foundation of everything I do. There are many Christians that don't have any clue of what I'm talking about. They hear me talk about how to live, but they don't know how to consciously make the connection. But it's okay, because that doesn't mean that that's their mission. And there are a lot of people that do believe that they have a black thumb, meaning that they kill everything, not that black is bad, right? And that other people have green thumbs. But as Sister Vivian has said, I have known people now. My personal story is that my parents were into growing food and people around me when I was coming up. So I've always grown stuff. I've never lived in a house where I didn't grow fruit trees, my own tomatoes. Something was happening in my house, right? And so I've never really had a problem growing things, but it was because I watched my parents, and they used to grow things and came from a lineage of people that grew things. So a lot of just growing stuff around the house is in my lineage, like you kind of spoke about your grandfather's idea, right? But what I want to do is transition, Sister Vivian, first into those people who start apartments, who may not necessarily have any land, right? So they can't really fathom what we're going to talk about amendments and what the difference soil tilling versus no tilling and such. Because we're going to get into that in a few minutes, but I want you to just talk about, what would your suggestion be to the person who has only a balcony, or maybe not even a balcony, get some window seals, right? But they don't have a large backyard. They really don't have any place where they think they really can get out there and do something. But what would you say to that person that could be their potential of what they could grow even in the environment?
Well, what I would say is that you can grow just about anything through a method called container gardening, which is where you grow your vegetables in a container, in a pot, in a box. We at the Elephant Gardens, we started last year a program called buckets, and that's where we do 7-gallon containers, and we put the soil in those containers, and our tomatoes, our eggplant, pepper plant, you name it, it's growing right up out of that So you can still grow a lot of food. Eggplant, we've got eggplants, we've got it all in pots. You just need sun and you need to water it and make sure that your soil has the proper nutrients. And sometimes the plants actually grow a little better that way. And part of the reason is because if that soil that you have that plant in is really nutrient rich, it doesn't have to really, the plant doesn't have to really compete for nutrients with another plant or weeds or anything else. So they tend to thrive, and they sometimes will grow even larger and fruit even better than plants grown traditionally because they're just preening around in this pot and they're just happy. You know, they get all the attention. So I would say to you that anyone that lives in an apartment, you can grow. That's what our buddy buckets. We call them buddy buckets because we actually put two plants in the pot that grow well together, like tomato, basil. Mm-hmm. So they're buddies, right? It's a technique called companion planting, where you will grow peppers and parsley, or just two plants that like each other. And we tend to do, because we grow a lot of herbs, we tend to pair our vegetables with herbs. And so our buddy buckets, we have eggplant and tarragon, and strawberries and borage, and potatoes and leeks. So we do combinations, but they're buddies, and so we call ours buddy buckets. And I would recommend that you look into container growing, container gardening, and companion planting, because you can grow two plants right there on your patio as long as there's some sun. And they're movable, so I mean they're mobile, so you can pick it up, take it to the sun, neighbor's patio, and then you guys can share tomatoes or whatever. So where there's a will, there's a way. That's what I would say.
And brothers and sisters, look at that name behind her, that Elephant Gardens. You can find her on Instagram and Facebook, and she's going to give her information again. But the point that I'm getting to is that we can learn a lot from each other, right? Because what I just heard her say, and I want her to comment really quickly, is she said attention. And then the other thing that I was thinking as she was talking is love. Is attention and love important for a plant?
Oh my gosh, is it important for you and me? Yeah. We won't thrive without it, and our plants certainly don't. And they'll tell you, I'm not happy, right?
That's right.
They'll tell you that very quickly.
Yes.
And one thing I hear sometimes from beginner growers is, my plants just didn't do well last year. I don't know what happened, or I don't really have time, and that really is key. Plants do need attention. Usually, if you find your plant didn't grow well, I'm going to guess that there was some soil, or you just didn't pay attention to it, and maybe didn't water it enough, or give it enough nutrients. Plants do need, throughout their growing cycle, from the beginning, but from the to the middle to the end being when it's time to the product, the fruit, produce. At each stage, they need something. Okay? And if you're doing, by the way, containers or raised beds, you are going to need to give it even a little bit more attention, because it's going to need to be watered more regularly than a plant would that's necessarily in the ground, because the rain doesn't necessarily get in the bucket the same way it will the ground, and because it's the ground, the root systems are able to draw water up from deep down. A bucket is a bucket. It's only going to be able to draw water from that container. So there are some differences in care, but at the end of the day, all plants, just like us, they need nurturing, they need cultivation, they need nurturing, they need attention very badly. And so usually if there's some failure of your crop, whether it's in a bucket or a raised bed or in ground, it usually has something to do with some attention that it needs in some area. And they can change on you really quickly. You can come out one day and have this beautiful squash plant, I'm speaking from experience, and then go back 2 or 3 days later, and you're like, what's happened? And it's dead.
Yes.
Or it's dying, and you're like, what's going on? And it's this squash borer that has bored into the root system and killed the whole plant. Or it's the squash bug that has laid eggs on the backside of your leaf and has multiplied and has all these little nasty bugs around it that is chewing away at the leaf. So all of these things, or it's powdery mildew, it's some sort of, and these things happen overnight. So the way to prevent is, of course, to start off with a strong plant and give a strong soil, nutrient-rich soil, so that the immune system, if you will, of the plant is strong enough to fight off any types of pest or disease. But the other thing is just to pay attention and to constantly police your crop. And that is, and when I say constantly, I mean that.
Yes.
Especially when you start growing a lot. Now, if you're growing 1 or 2 plants, that's more easy to do. But once you start growing wide and far, or as you scale out your garden or your farm, you obviously are going to need to do more.
So that's an excellent segue into the next part, which is, what about those nutrients that are supposed to make your garden strong and have the ability to ward off things, just like we as humans, right? And so when we talk about the nutrients in the soil, and we talk about amendments, you know, the only amendment I know about is the 13th Amendment that say we still slaves, right? Because we're incarcerated. But, you know, I'm being a little facetious, but, you know, some people may not necessarily know exactly what you mean when you say amendments. But just talk a little bit about that, because that is important not only when you're doing your home plants, like if you do the buddy bucket, like she just finished saying, or you just have a couple of little plastic containers on your you know, patio, or if you just have a little bit of concrete in the back of your yard, or you just a little bit of grass. If you're doing it in containers, you know, like she said, sometimes you don't have a lot of the weeds and other things that will attack your soil and your plant, but you still do time after time have to continue to condition your soil, because some of the nutrients and some of the good stuff in your soil will run out every time you wet it and you see stuff come out the bottom. That's some of your soil and some of the good stuff. So talk about that, sister, about, and let's kind of, as you do that, let's transition from that pot in the house or that pot on the balcony to what about the larger yard, or the person that has and half an acre and they're like, man, I don't have time to do all of that, but where should they start? How can they start? And what is the confidence level as you learn about the nutrients, right? Because if you can grow something in a 2x4 little plastic container on your patio, and you get something from that, you're going to be inspired to do more. You're going to want to grow more, grow bigger, and have bigger places. So let's talk about soil amendments, that proper nutrition. What are the ideas to make sure that's going on? And then how do we graduate to not just being able to pull a couple tomatoes out for dinner, but be able to say, okay, I got enough food to do a whole meal, but I can also suggest something maybe to my neighbors and eventually get to a place where you can monetize it.
Right. So soil is king.
Yes.
Soil means everything when it comes to growing. I think the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan sent an entourage up to Will Allen's operation in, I want to say, is it Wisconsin, to learn about how to, quote unquote, make your own soil. Now, that essentially is composting. But soil, just to make it simple, whether it's soil that's in a pot, soil that's in a container, which usually, if, by the way, if it is that type of soil, it's usually soil that you purchased, right? In most instances, you've had to get it from someplace.
That's right.
So, if that being the case, you're going to want to look for organic soil, garden soil, and even if it's in a pot, because when we grow our buddy buckets, we do use garden soil because we want to mimic the soil of the ground, but we also mix in, because it is still a pot, a little bit of potting soil, which is different from garden soil because it's lighter, it has pearl-like It's still more garden soil than potting soil, but it's a mixture. But what you'll learn in gardening is that soil means everything. The pH of the soil, how acidic or how alkaline your soil is, that matters. Most soil, like if you're doing blueberry, for instance, you may need to have a very acidic soil. You need to have a 5.8 pH, which is pretty acidic, yes. And that's because they won't turn blue without that acidic soil. You can actually add something to the soil like sulfur, elemental sulfur, to lower the pH of your soil. But you may need to raise the pH of your soil. And there are soil amendments. Amendment just means a change, right? Something you're doing that changes the soil. Yes. Just like you amend the Constitution, you're really just changing it. You're modifying it in some manner. So that's what you're doing to the soil when you're adding these amendments. The main nutrients that your soil needs, which you'll learn very quickly, is NPK, and that's your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. Those are really, really, really important. Okay, those are the main things that your soil needs. But it also needs other nutrients, trace minerals. So on a bag of soil, it's going to tell you, first of all, always get organic, always buy organic. But on a bag of soil, it's going to tell you the NPK. It's going to have 3 numbers. And that's going to tell you how much nitrogen, how much potassium, how much phosphorus. It's going to tell you that. Actually, I have that switch. It's how much phosphorus, how much potassium. The K is the potassium. It's going to tell you that. But what you need to know is that if you're going to dig up your backyard, then you're going to want to have your soil tested. And that may sound really hard and complicated, but it is not. It's so easy. You're just really going to go around the yard in the area that you've identified as the area that you're going to want to grow. And you're going to take little samples about 6 inches in various spots. You're going to put it in a big bag. You mix it all together, and you're going to scoop out about a cup of that. And then you're going to send it off to be tested. And there's tons of places to do it. Most of your extension offices in your city will tell you where to send your soil where you can. If you're like in Indianapolis, you can actually get your soil tested for lead free, because Indiana has a real bad issue in the cities, in the urban environments, with lead in the soil. So they'll come out and test your soil for lead for free. And of course, we've had ours tested for that, because that's very important. You don't want any lead in your soil. And there are ways to get rid of it as well. There are ways to pull the lead up. Sunflowers, for instance, can be planted, and they'll draw the toxins up out of the soil. That's another conversation. But bottom line, soil is everything. Yes. So you're going to want to learn as much as possible. And I unabashedly will go to YouTube. Right. I will go to my extension. I will buy books I have tons of books, and specifically on soil, specifically on composting. Just a little word on composting. Composting, or the making of your own soil. Okay, that's all we're doing when we're composting. Is when you take carbon products, your brown, carbon equal brown equals sticks, leaves, wood, chips, okay? That's your carbon. And you mix that with your nitrogen. Now, your nitrogen is your coffee grounds, your banana peels, your egg shells, your vegetable cuttings, all of that. That's your nitrogen. When the two of those get together, they have this little conversation, and they start, this little reaction, and next thing you know, they're breaking down, and the worms kind of get into the action, and they're like, hey, and they start helping, and they purify the soil, and next thing you know, what was this conglomeration of nitrogen and carbon has now become soil or compost, and it is very vital that you get the best soil. If you are going to dig up your yard, you need to know what you've got. Now, the testing lab that we use, it's called, I think, AL Labs. I'll get the name and send it to our good doctors so that you all can have that. It's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. There are tons all over the country, so you don't have to send yours But what I do like about them is that they will tell me everything that's in my soil and everything that's not in my soil.
Right, right.
So that's important. And my good neighbor that he first introduced me to this whole concept of getting your soil tested, and I was a little, I don't know if I want to do that. And I made this a big deal, like it was so hard or so much bigger than it was. And then when I finally did it, it was like, okay, what was the deal there, baby? This is easy. And it's really important because you will know what is already there. Why is that important? Because you don't want to amend in a way you don't need.
Right.
You don't want to add nutrients to your soil that you don't actually need, because that is very harmful. That will cause problems. So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that, I'm trying to get my light together. Looks like I got some light that I need to get rid of. But you don't want to add what's not needed, because if you add too much phosphorus or too much the wrong kind of nitrogen or too much of potassium, you might get foliage, for instance, right. That's really green and beautiful and no fruit.
Right.
So all of it matters. A lot of people over amend. They just think, oh, I'm just going to add all the fertilizers in the world, and they don't get the results that they think they're going to get. It actually is more harmful than good. So knowing your soil and knowing what to add and what not to add is very, very important. It's a very important aspect of growing that I was intimidated by, honestly, at first. But to all of you who may be new at this or haven't really delved into it to this extent, it's not hard. It may sound like it is, but it's not. There are tools out there that will help you know the pH of your soil. The testing will do that. And if you're buying soil in a bag, all that's pretty much on the bag. You pretty much know what you're getting. But there are some amendments, Dr. Achille, that I started using last year. The one in particular is called azomite, and AZOMITE. And I was actually looking for a source of selenium, because years ago I read some articles about how some AIDS patients
often have you seen people come and just involve themselves with you, and they catch that bug, and then next thing you know, they're 50 pounds lighter, or they're 4 diseases less, or their mind has just been open, and their stress level has come down, and they just don't see life the same. What kind of experiences have you had from that perspective? I would say more the psychological, spiritual perspective of gardening.
Well, first of all, we get thanked a lot by people just walking down the street that say thank you.
Yes.
For just growing a garden in the middle of our neighborhood. People love the garden. We get asked all the time, well, do people still, because when we first bought the property, it was a 6-foot fence with barbed wire in the front, and I always wanted to change it because it's not like it said welcome, and so finally we got a lower fence, and there was concern from some that were like, well, aren't people going to steal? No one steals from us. And I think it's because people have an appreciation for anybody's effort to beautify their neighborhood. I've often called agriculture and farming, urban farming and farming, no matter where you are, a panacea for what ails us.
Yes.
Whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about an exercise or lack thereof in our neighborhoods, crime, whether you're talking about neighborhood beautification, gardening and farming answers all of that. It has an answer for each one of those things that trouble our communities, including jobs and youth activities. So we started a program 2 years ago called Tomorrowland's Children, and it's a 4-H program. We teach the Junior Master Gardener program. So I worked with 9 to 12-year-olds, myself, my mother, and really my whole family, my daughters, sons, and the light bulbs that go off in their heads and the joy they find in putting something in the ground, because we did a combination of transplants where they had already started plant, a starter plant, and then also seeds that they had to just stick in the ground and cover. And when those pop up and they were able to each go out to their 4x4 plot and see what their own hands have put forth, the joy and teaching them then, because we segued into the kitchen, and now it was, okay, now let's cook something with this. That experience was really gratifying for me, because number one, it was finally an answer to one of our original mission points, which was to teach the youth. But it was also gratifying because they loved it so much. They really loved it. It taught, farming teaches science, it teaches math. That 4x4 plot, they had to all measure. You have to measure how far apart to plant your seeds. You have to know depth of seeds. Certain seeds get planted at different depths. So it teaches such a wide array of STEM that it really is gratifying just in that alone. And knowing that my neighbors and friends come to our little farm stand, which we call our mobile pharmacy, and buy produce that we grew, that's as gratifying as it can get. Yes. And in regards to the transformation health-wise, there are a lot of people come to us after they've gone to the doctor and he's told them you need to change your diet. Diabetes, I think 40%, I heard Sister Vivian Muhammad say 40%